Welcome to Shadow Storyteller. If you love true tales that linger in the quiet hours before sleep, do not forget to subscribe, like, and leave a comment below. Your support helps bring more haunting stories to life. Now, settle in, turn down the lights, and listen closely, because tonight's story began with a whisper no one else could hear. In the late autumn of 2017, in the hushed hills of Bethel, Maine, where fog settled between pines like secrets too heavy to carry, 10-year-old Talia Winslow found something that should never have spoken her name. It was the kind of afternoon where time itself seemed to pause, golden light filtered through bare branches, and the air smelled of damp earth and wood smoke. Talia had been helping her grandmother clear out the attic above their weathered farmhouse, a place untouched since the 1950s. Dust motes swirled in lazy spirals as she pulled open a cedar chest tucked beneath a slanted eave. Inside, wrapped in yellowed muslin, lay a doll. Not the cheerful, rosy-cheeked kind sold in toy stores, but something older. Its porcelain face was cracked along the left cheekbone, one glass eye slightly clouded, the other unervingly clear. Its hair, once probably a soft chestnut, had faded to the color of old tea. It wore a miniature hand-stitched calico dress, the hem frayed from time. At the base of its neck, barely legible, was a name burned into the wood, Elspeth. Talia did not recognize the name, but as her fingers brushed the doll's cold cheek, a whisper curled through the attic air, just 3 syllables, soft and breathy, like wind through dry grass. The Lee. She froze. Her grandmother, Calliope, had been sorting buttons into mason jars on the other side of the room. "You all right, dear?" she asked, not looking up. Talia swallowed, clutching the doll tighter. Did you say my name?" Calliope turned then, her brows knitting together. "No, sweetheart." "Why?" Talia stared at the doll. Its glass eye caught the light, glinting like it knew something she didn't. She said nothing more that day, but tucked Elspeth beneath her arm and carried her downstairs. That night, as rain began to patter against the window pane, Talia placed the doll on the rocking chair beside her bed. She told herself it was just curiosity, but deep down she knew something about Elspeth felt expectant. At exactly 1:17 in the morning, according to the digital clock on her nightstand, Talia woke to the sound of rocking. Fit, slow, steady, deliberate. Her breath hitched. The chair was empty. She sat up, heart hammering, scanning the dim room. Moonlight painted silver stripes across the floorboards. Nothing moved. Yet the rocking had been real. She'd felt the vibration through the mattress. Then, from the corner near the closet, came another whisper. "Talia!" Not a question, not a call. A statement, like her name belonged to someone else now. She pulled the covers over her head, trembling. But the whispers didn't stop. They came every night after that, sometimes murmuring her name, sometimes humming a tune she almost recognized. A lullaby her grandmother once said was sung only in the far north counties, where French and English tangled in old hymns. Other times, the doll would appear in places Talia did not remember leaving it: on the kitchen counter, facing the stove; on the back porch swing, staring toward the woods; once, standing upright in the bathtub, dry despite the steam. Calliope grew concerned, not because she believed in ghosts, but because Talia stopped eating. Her eyes darkened with sleeplessness. She flinched at sudden noises. When her grandmother asked what was wrong, Talia only whispered, "Elspeth won't let me sleep." It was then that Calliope grew pale. "Elspeth," she repeated, her voice thin. "Where did you hear that name?" "In the attic," Talia said. "On the doll." Calliope sat down heavily at the kitchen table. For a long while, she said nothing. Outside, an owl called, a low, mournful sound that seemed to echo the silence between them. Finally, she spoke. "Elspeth Voss was my cousin." She lived with us for a summer in 1953. She was, well, not in the way doctors understand. She spoke to things no one else saw. Drew pictures of faces that weren't in any photograph. And she carried that doll everywhere. Said it was her sister. Talia felt a chill crawl up her spine. What happened to her? She asked. Calliope's hands trembled as she poured tea she did not drink. One morning she was gone. Vanished. They searched the woods for weeks. Never found a trace. But the doll was left on her pillow. Perfectly placed, like someone had tucked it in. Talia's breath came fast. Then, why did it whisper my name? Calliope looked at her with eyes full of sorrow. Because Elspeth always wanted a sister. And now, she thinks she's found one. That night, Talia tried to lock the doll in the cellar. But by dawn, Elspeth sat once more on the rocking chair, this time with one small hand raised as if beckoning. Desperate, Talia decided to do what no one had dared in over 60 years. She would take Elspeth back to where Elspeth had last been seen alive. The old root cellar behind the abandoned Voss homestead, half swallowed by the forest 2 miles east of town. She went at dusk, the sky bruised purple and orange. The walk was quiet except for the crunch of dry leaves and the occasional rustle in the underbrush. When she reached the collapsed stone structure, its entrance choked with ivy and brambles, she hesitated. "Go home," she whispered to the doll, holding it out toward the darkness. "This is your place." The wind stilled. Even the crickets fell silent. Then, from deep within the ruin, something answered, not a whisper this time, but a voice, clear and young and achingly lonely. "I have no home." Talia's tears fell hot and fast. She did not know if it was Elspeth speaking, or something wearing Elspeth's voice like a borrowed coat. She knelt and placed the doll just inside the threshold. "Yes," she said. "Please." She turned and ran, not looking back. For 3 nights, there was silence. No rocking. No whispers. Talia slept deeply for the first time in weeks. But on the 4th night, as she drifted toward sleep, she heard it again, faint, distant, but unmistakable. The Leah. This time, it came from outside her window. And it was not alone. Other voices joined it, soft, overlapping, like many children speaking at once. Forever. She pressed her face into her pillow, squeezing her eyes shut. She knew, with a certainty colder than winter, that Elspeth had not been the only one waiting in that cellar. And now they all knew her name. The next morning, the doll was back on Talia's windowsill. She hadn't heard it return. There had been no creak of floorboards, no rustle of fabric. Just silence. Then Elspeth, seated primly against the pane, her single clear eye fixed on Talia's bed as if she'd been watching all night. Talia's breath caught in her throat. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She simply lay there, wrapped in sheets that suddenly felt too thin, too fragile, against whatever force had carried that doll through locked doors and closed windows. Downstairs, the coffee pot gurgled to life. Calliope was already awake, humming softly, a habit she'd had since Talia was small. But this morning, the tune was different. Slower, sadder, and undeniably familiar. It was the same lullaby Elspeth had whispered in the dark. Talia threw off the covers and ran down the stairs, bare feet slapping against worn wood. "Grandma," she gasped, "you're humming it? The song. It's the one from the doll." Calliope stopped mid-stir, spoon hovering over her teacup. Her expression flickered, not surprise, but something deeper. Recognition. Dread. "I haven't sung that since I was a girl," she murmured. "Not since Elspeth." "But you just were," Talia insisted, voice trembling. "I heard it, clear as anything." Calliope set the spoon down slowly. "Sometimes," she said, eyes distant, Old things come back through us without our knowing, like echoes finding a way to speak. Talia didn't understand then, but she would. That afternoon, while Calliope napped in her armchair by the wood stove, Talia crept back to the attic. She needed proof, not just for herself, but for anyone who might listen. She grabbed her phone, switched on the voice recorder, and placed it beside the doll, which now sat on an old trunk near the dormer window. "Elspeth," she whispered, "if you're here, say my name." Silence. She waited 10 seconds. 20. Just as she was about to give up, a gust of wind rattled the eaves, but the windows were closed. Then, faintly, layered beneath the sigh of the house itself, came a voice. It wasn't one voice. It was many, some young, some older, all overlapping like whispers rising from deep water. And beneath them, a rhythmic tapping, like tiny fingers drumming on wood. Talia's hands shook as she stopped the recording. She played it back. Clear as day, the voices emerged from her phone's speaker. Her stomach twisted. This wasn't imagination. This wasn't grief or fear playing tricks. Something was here, and it was growing stronger. She showed the recording to Calliope that evening. The older woman listened once, then a second time with her eyes closed. When it ended, she didn't speak for a full minute. "We need to go to the town archives," she finally said. Bethel's Historical Society occupied a converted church on Maple Street, its bell long silent, its pews replaced by filing cabinets and microfilm readers. The curator, a retired schoolteacher named Miriam Hargrove, greeted them with polite curiosity. When Calliope mentioned the Voss family, Miriam's smile faltered. "Oh," she said softly, "that name." She led them to a back room lined with ledgers and yellowed newspapers. From a drawer labeled Unresolved Disappearances, 1950 to 1959, she pulled a slim folder. Elspeth Voss wasn't the only child who vanished that summer, Miriam said, her voice hushed. Between June and August of 1953, 5 children under the age of 12 disappeared from this region. No bodies, no ransom notes, nothing, just gone. Talia's blood ran cold. Locals called it the quiet summer, Miriam continued. No one talked about it. Not really. But some said the woods near the Voss property, they didn't feel right after that. Like something had opened up and never closed. She slid a brittle newspaper clipping across the table. The headline read, "Local Girl Vanishes, No Clues in Bethel Case." Beneath it was a grainy photo of a thin girl with dark braids and wide eyes. But in the background of the photo, standing on the porch behind her, was a row of dolls propped on the railing, each one eerily similar to the one now in Talia's room. Same glass eyes, same faded dresses, same stillness that felt too much like watching. "They say Elspeth made them," Miriam added. "Claimed they were her sisters. She talked to them for hours, sing to them, even set places for them at the dinner table." Calliope closed her eyes. "I remember," she whispered. "Mother used to scold her for it. But Elspeth would just smile and say, 'They're hungry, Aunt May. They need to eat too.'" Talia felt sick. "So, the voices I heard, were they the other children?" Miriam exchanged a glance with Calliope. Neither answered, but their silence was answer enough. That night, Talia refused to sleep alone. She dragged her mattress into Calliope's room and lay curled beneath a quilt stitched with stars. For hours, the house was quiet. Then, just past midnight, the wind picked up, howling through the pines like a chorus of lost things. A sound came from the hallway. Not footsteps. Not knocking. Singing. Soft, high, and achingly sweet. The same lullaby, now carried by many voices in perfect, unnatural harmony. Talia clutched the quilt to her chin. "Grandma," she breathed. Calliope was already sitting up, eyes wide, listening. "They're at the door," Talia whispered, and they were. Not banging, not demanding entry, just waiting, singing, begging. Through the thin wood of the bedroom door came a new whisper, closer, clearer than before. "Talia, oh, we miss you." She squeezed her eyes shut. "I'm not yours," she whispered back, voice breaking. "I'm not your sister." The singing stopped. For 3 heartbeats, there was nothing. Then a single, slow knock. Knock, knock, knock. Not on the door. On the window. Talia turned her head. Outside, in the moonlight, stood 5 small figures. They're dressed in nightgowns long faded to gray. Their faces were indistinct, blurred like reflections in rippling water, but their hands were pressed flat against the glass. And in the arms of the one in front, Elspeth's doll, now clean, its cracked cheeks smoothed as if healed. The figure tilted its head. "Come play," it mouthed, though no sound came. Calliope grabbed Talia's hand. "Don't look," she urged. "Don't answer. They feed on attention, on names spoken aloud, on fear." But Talia had already spoken the name. She had carried the doll. She had listened. And in doing so, she had invited them in, not through the door, but through the cracks in the world where lonely things wait. The next day, Talia insisted they burn the doll. Calliope hesitated. "Fire might not be enough," she warned. "Some things don't die. They just move on." But Talia was desperate. They built a small pyre in the stone ring behind the barn, the same spot where generations of Winslows had burned old letters and broken tools. Talia placed Elspeth in the center, her porcelain face turned to the sky. As the flames rose, something strange happened. The doll didn't melt. It blackened, yes, but its eyes remained clear. And as the fire crackled, a single word drifted on the smoke, carried on no wind. Soon, that night, Talia dreamed she was standing in the root cellar. Not alone. Dozens of children surrounded her, their hands clasped, their eyes empty. At the center stood Elspeth, older now, her hair long and tangled with roots, her mouth moving in silent song. "You promised to stay," she said. "You left us waiting." "I didn't promise anything," Talia cried in the dream. "But you knew our names," Elspeth replied. "And once you know a ghost's name, you belong to it." Talia woke gasping. Her bedroom was empty. The doll was gone. But on her pillow, resting where her head had been, lay a single lock of hair, dark, coarse, and tied with a thread of calico fabric. She didn't tell Calliope. She couldn't, because deep down she feared what her grandmother might say, that it was already too late. Over the next week, Talia began to change. She stopped eating again. She spoke less. Sometimes, Calliope would find her standing at the edge of the woods, staring into the trees as if listening. When asked what she heard, Talia would only whisper, "They're teaching me the song." Then, on the morning of the first snow, Talia vanished. Not dramatically. Not with a scream. She simply didn't come down for breakfast. Her bed was neatly made. Her shoes were gone. And on her nightstand, the voice recorder played on a loop, a new file, time-stamped 3:17 a.m. When Calliope pressed play, she heard her granddaughter's voice, calm and distant, weaving through a chorus of children. "I understand now," Talia said. "They weren't lost. They were waiting for someone to remember them, to say their names." The pause. Then, softly, "My name is Talia Winslow, and I am their sister." The recording ended with the sound of footsteps fading into snow and the faint, final notes of the lullaby sung by voices too many to count. Calliope never found her. Search parties combed the woods for weeks. Drones scanned the canopy. Psychics came and went. But Bethel kept its secrets, as it always had. Years later, Locals say that on still winter nights, if you walk near the old Voss property, you might hear singing. And if you listen closely, one voice will sound almost familiar, clearer, closer, calling not in fear, but in welcome. "Come play," it whispers. "We've been waiting." 23 years after Talia disappeared, the Winslow farmhouse stood wrapped in ivy and silence. Calliope had passed peacefully in her sleep during the winter of 2041, her hands folded over a faded photograph of her granddaughter, age 10, smiling beneath a summer sun that no longer seemed to exist. The house sat empty for years, its windows clouded, its porch sagging beneath the weight of rain and time. Locals avoided it, not out of superstition, though Bethel had plenty of that, but because something about the place unsettled even the bravest hikers and curious teenagers. It wasn't haunted in the way people expected, no slamming doors, no shadow figures. Just an unnatural stillness, a quiet that felt expectant. Then, in early spring of 2064, a letter arrived at the Bethel Historical Society. It was handwritten on thick cream-colored paper, the ink slightly smudged, as if written in haste or tears. The return address was blank. The signature at the bottom, however, made Miriam Hargrove's breath catch. Talia Winslow. She hadn't aged a day in the photo attached to the letter, same dark eyes, same solemn smile. But the date on the envelope said otherwise, March 3, 2064. Miriam drove to the farmhouse that afternoon, heart pounding. The letter claimed Talia was returning, not as a ghost, not as a memory, but as someone who had been away, learning, waiting, and now ready to come home. The front door opened before Miriam could knock. Inside, the air was warm. The wood stove glowed faintly, though no one had lit a fire in decades. And there, standing in the kitchen with her back to the doorway, was a woman who looked no older than 30, though she should have been in her mid-30s if she had aged at all. "Hello, Miriam," she said without turning. "Real," Miriam whispered. Talia turned then. Her eyes were older than her face suggested, deep with knowing, with sorrow, with something just beyond human. She wore a simple dress the color of moss, her hair braided with dried lavender and sprigs of pine. "I never stopped being real," Talia said gently. "I just stepped into a different kind of time." She motioned for Miriam to sit. 2 teacups sat on the table, already steaming. Over the next hour, Talia spoke, carefully, deliberately, about where she'd been. Not underground, not in another world, but in the spaces between moments, in the echoes left behind by children who were never properly mourned. The lullaby, she explained, was not a haunting. It was a tether, a way for the lost to stay connected to the living who could still hear them. "Their names were forgotten," Talia said, her fingers tracing the rim of her cup. "So they gave them to me. I carry them now. All 5. Court, Milo, Lynette, Jonah. I speak their names every morning and every night, so the world doesn't swallow them whole." Miriam stared. "And the doll?" Talia's expression softened. "Elspeth wasn't haunting me. She was trying to protect me. The others, they wanted a new sister. But Elspeth remembered what it was like to be alone. She chose me, not to take me, but to show me the truth." "But why come back now?" Miriam asked. "Because someone new is listening," Talia replied. Just then, a car door slammed outside. Both women turned toward the window. A young woman stood at the edge of the driveway, suitcase in hand, eyes fixed on the house as if pulled by an invisible thread. Her name, Talia would later learn, was Isolde Vale, a name so rare even the town clerk had to sound it out twice. She had arrived in Bethel that morning, claiming she dreamed of this house for weeks. In her dream, a girl with braided hair stood on the porch and whispered, "You're the one who remembers." Isolde didn't know why she'd been chosen. She was a librarian from Portland, quiet, observant, prone to collecting folk tales and forgotten histories. She carried no fear, only curiosity and a strange, aching familiarity. Talia rose and walked to the door. She didn't open it. It swung inward on its own. Isolde stepped inside, her breath visible in the cool air. She looked at Talia, then at the teacups, then at the staircase leading up to the attic. "They're still here, aren't they?" Isolde asked softly. Talia nodded. "But not the way you think. They don't want to hurt anyone. They just want to be known." That evening, as dusk settled over the hills, Isolde sat with Talia on the porch. Fireflies blinked in the meadow beyond the fence. Somewhere in the woods, an owl called. "I read about you," Isolde admitted. "In the archives. Your disappearance. The doll. I thought it was a ghost story." "It is," Talia said. "But not the kind with monsters. The kind with children who never got to say goodbye." Isolde was quiet for a long time. Then she reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small object wrapped in cloth. She unfolded it slowly. It was another doll. This one had a face of smooth bisque, blue eyes, and a dress stitched from scraps of an old church banner. On its chest, in faded ink, was a name, Lynette. "I found it in the attic of the old Bethel library," Isolde said. "It was hidden behind a stack of hymnals. When I touched it, I heard a hum, like a lullaby but backward." Talia's eyes filled with tears. Lynette was the youngest, only 5 when she vanished. She loved music, used to clap along to anything with rhythm. She took the doll gently as if holding a sleeping child. "They're reaching out again," she murmured. "Not to take, to return." Over the next few weeks, Isolde stayed at the farmhouse. She helped Talia clean the attic, not to banish the past, but to make room for it. They placed the dolls on a shelf by the window, Elspeth, Lynette, and soon, others that began to appear. A boy's wooden soldier with one arm missing, a rag doll with yarn hair, a porcelain baby with a chipped nose. Each came with a whisper, each with a name. And every night, Isolde recorded the voices, not to prove they existed, but to honor them. She transcribed the lullaby into sheet music. She wrote down the fragments of stories the whispers shared: a red bicycle left in the rain, a mother's last kiss, the taste of blackberry pie on a summer afternoon. The town noticed the change. The oppressive silence around the Winslow property lifted. Birds returned. Wildflowers bloomed where none had grown in years. Children, who once avoided the road past the house, now dared to wave as they rode their bikes. One afternoon, a boy named Ezra left a small drawing on the porch, a stick figure girl holding hands with 5 others beneath a smiling sun. Beneath it, he'd written, "Thank you for remembering us." Talia placed it on the mantel beside Calliope's photograph. But not all change was gentle. Late one October night, a storm rolled in from the north, unseasonably fierce, with thunder that sounded like footsteps. The wind howled through the eaves, and the dolls on the shelf began to rattle. Isolde woke to the sound of singing, but this time, it was angry. Distorted. The lullaby had twisted into something sharp, jagged. "They're scared," Talia said, already standing by the window. "Someone's coming." Minutes later, headlights cut through the rain. A black SUV pulled into the driveway. 2 men in dark coats stepped out, carrying equipment that looked more scientific than spiritual. Dr. Marcus Rhine and Dr. Elena Cho, researchers from a private paranormal institute based in Boston. They'd heard rumors, found Isolde's unposted field notes online, traced the audio samples. They didn't believe in ghosts. They believed in frequencies, residual energy, electromagnetic imprints. And they wanted to extract it, to bottle the whispers, to run tests, to publish. "You don't understand what you're dealing with," Talia told them when they knocked, rain dripping from their collars. "We understand data," Ryan replied coldly. "And your house is emitting anomalous vocal patterns. We're here to document it for science." Talia stepped back. "You're not welcome." But they didn't leave. That night, they set up sensors in the yard, microphones in the trees. At 3:17 a.m., the same hour Talia had vanished decades earlier, the equipment overloaded. Lights flickered. The recording devices captured not whispers, but a single command spoken by 100 voices at once. "Leave." The men ignored it. By dawn, their SUV's engine wouldn't start. Their phones were dead. And carved into the mud beside their boots were 5 names: Elspeth, Cor, Milo, Lynette, Jonah. They left without another word. After that, Talia knew the balance had shifted. The children were no longer just waiting. They were defending. She turned to Isolde. "It's time." "For what?" "To pass the thread." Talia led her to the attic, to the cedar chest where it all began. Inside, beneath layers of fabric, lay a blank doll, unpainted, unformed, made of smooth wood and unspun wool. "This is yours," Talia said. "If you accept it, you'll hear them too. Not just their names, their joys, their fears, their unfinished days. You'll carry them like I did, like Elspeth did before me." Isolde stared at the doll. She thought of her lonely childhood, of nights spent reading ghost stories not for thrills, but for company. She thought of the way this house had felt like home the moment she saw it. She reached out. The moment her fingers touched the wood, a warmth spread through her chest. And from somewhere deep in the walls, a single, clear voice whispered, "Isolde." Not a warning, a welcome. She nodded. "I accept." In the years that followed, the Winslow house became something new, not a site of fear, but a sanctuary. Isolde opened its doors to those who felt unseen, who carried names no one remembered. She hosted storytelling circles, recorded oral histories, and kept the teacups filled. Talia remained for a time, then slowly faded, not into death, but into the background hum of the place. Her presence felt in the rustle of leaves, in the scent of lavender on still nights. And every autumn, on the anniversary of Talia's return, the lullaby would rise again, not from the attic, but from the hearts of those who sat on the porch, hands clasped, names spoken aloud. Because some ghosts aren't meant to be banished. They're meant to be remembered. By the autumn of 2071, the Winslow farmhouse had become a quiet landmark in Bethel, not on any official map, but in the whispered stories of librarians, folklorists, and those who believed memory could be a form of magic. Visitors came not with skepticism, but with offerings: pressed wildflowers, handwritten letters to children they'd never met, small handmade dolls stitched with care and intent. Isolde Vale lived in the house year-round, though she never called herself its owner. "I'm its keeper," she'd say, stirring tea by the hearth. "The house belongs to the names." She kept meticulous records, not in digital files, but in leather-bound journals lined with pressed leaves and tucked with faded ribbons. Each entry began the same way: "Today, I spoke the names. Cor, Milo, Lynette, Jonah." And now, quietly added beneath them, "Talia." For though Talia walked among the pines less and less, her voice still came, sometimes in the creak of the rocking chair, sometimes in the rustle of pages turning in an empty room. Isolde knew she hadn't gone. She had simply woven herself into the fabric of the place, becoming part of the lullaby itself. Then, on a foggy October morning, a package arrived with no return address. It was wrapped in brown paper, tied with twine, and smelled faintly of cedar and pine resin. Inside lay a small wooden box, its surface carved with symbols Isolde didn't recognize: interlocking circles, spirals, and 5 dots arranged like stars in a forgotten constellation. Beneath the box was a note, written in elegant, looping script. The circle grows. The sixth waits. Her hands trembled as she opened the box. Inside rested a doll unlike any she'd seen before. Its face was smooth, featureless, waiting to be known. Its body was hollow, lined with thin paper that crinkled like dried leaves. Tucked into its chest cavity was a folded slip of parchment. Unfolding it, Isolde read a single sentence. Find her before the first frost. No name, no location, just a plea carried across time. That evening, Isolde lit the beeswax candle and sat at the kitchen table, the doll cradled in her lap. She closed her eyes and whispered the 5 names, then added a 6th, though she did not yet know it. Who are you? She asked aloud. The wind outside stilled. Then, from deep within the doll's hollow chest, came a sound like breath drawn through reeds. A child's voice, faint but clear, answered. Cass. Just one syllable. But it carried weight. Longing. Isolde opened her eyes. The candle flame bent sharply to the left, though no draft moved through the room. On the windowsill, Elspeth's porcelain face gleamed in the moonlight, her cracked cheeks seeming to shimmer, almost healing. The search began the next day. Isolde combed through town archives, cross-referencing every missing child report from Maine, New Hampshire, and Vermont between 1940 and 1960. Nothing matched the name Cass. No Cashin, Cassandra, or Cassie had vanished in that era. But then she remembered something Miriam once told her. Sometimes, the names that matter most are the ones never given. She turned to oral histories, recordings of elderly residents, church sermons from the 50s, even grocery lists scribbled on the backs of receipts. In a reel of audio labeled Bethel Community Gathering, 1954, she heard it. A woman's voice, trembling, "Poor little thing," never had a proper name. They called her Cass because she came with the cassinia flowers the May she showed up. But the Voss girl, Elspeth, she said that wasn't right. Said the child already had a name, just no one could hear it yet. Isolde froze. Cass wasn't a nickname. It was a placeholder for a soul the world tried to erase. And she hadn't vanished with the others. She'd been left behind. Following fragmented clues, a land deed mentioning a caretaker's cottage near Cold Brook, a diary entry about the quiet infant in the root cellar, Isolde drove 17 miles north to a stretch of forest so dense, even hunters avoided it. There, half buried under ferns and moss, stood a stone well. Its mouth was sealed with a rusted iron grate. Carved into the capstone were the same 5 dots from the wooden box, and a 6th, freshly chiseled, still damp with morning dew. Isolde didn't hesitate. She pried the grate loose with a crowbar from her trunk. The well exhaled cold air, smelling of damp earth and old cloth. Tied to the rope inside was a small bundle wrapped in oilcloth. Her breath caught. Inside lay a child's dress, tiny, yellowed, embroidered with cassinia blossoms. And nestled within it, a lock of pale blonde hair bound with thread. As she lifted it, the wind rose, swirling dead leaves into a slow spiral. From the trees, voices emerged, not singing this time, but speaking in unison. Bring her home. Isolde returned to the farmhouse at dusk. She placed the dress and hair in the cedar chest beside the nameless doll. Then she lit 6 candles, 1 for each child, and sat vigil through the night. At 3:17 a.m., the doll's smooth face began to change. Not through carving or paint, but as if memory itself was shaping it. Features emerged, wide eyes, a small nose, lips parted as if about to speak. And when the first light touched the windowsill, the doll turned its head, just slightly, toward Isolde. Cass, Isolde whispered. The doll's hand lifted, fingers curling as if reaching. Isolde took it gently. Warmth spread through her palm. And then, clear as church bells on a still morning, came the full name. Cassandra Vale. She gasped. Her own surname. Later that day, she visited the Bethel Cemetery, where Calliope was buried beneath a simple stone. In an old birth ledger from 1953, hidden in the church basement, she found the truth. Calliope Winslow had a sister, never spoken of, never acknowledged. A stillborn daughter, they'd said. But the midwife's private notes told another story. Lived 3 hours. Cried once. Named Cassandra by the mother before she passed. Buried in the North Grove, as was the old way. Calliope had never told anyone. Not even Talia. But the land remembered. And the children, especially Elspeth, had kept watch over Cassandra's spirit all these years, waiting for a veil to return, to say the name, to claim her. Isolde was not just a keeper. She was family. That winter, she held a quiet ceremony beneath the pines. She placed 6 dolls on a blanket: Elspeth, Cora, Milo, Lynette, Jonah, and now Cassandra. She spoke each name aloud, then added a new line to her journal. Today I spoke the names, and one of them was mine. From that night on, the lullaby changed. No longer a summons. No longer a plea. It became a promise. And on the coldest night of the year, when frost painted the windows in silver lace, 6 figures could be seen walking through the meadow, hand in hand, laughing softly, their forms glowing faintly in the moonlight. At the center stood Talia, her hair braided with cassinia flowers, and beside her, a small girl with pale hair and bright, unburdened eyes. They didn't look back. They didn't need to, because now they were remembered. And memory in Bethel was the closest thing to forever. Spring came early to Bethel in the year 2072. Snow melted by the first week of March, revealing crocuses pushing through damp soil like secrets finally ready to be told. The Winslow farmhouse, once shrouded in mystery, now radiated a quiet warmth that drew not just the curious, but the broken, those carrying grief too heavy for daylight, too tender for ordinary words. Isolde continued her vigil, but something had shifted. She no longer recorded the names out of duty. She spoke them like blessings. And the house responded, not with whispers from hidden corners, but with soft affirmations. A teacup steaming when no fire burned, a blanket draped over her shoulders when she fell asleep reading, the faint scent of cassinia blossoms in rooms that held no flowers. Then, in mid-April, a letter arrived, not in the mailbox, but resting on the pillow of the spare bed upstairs. The envelope bore no stamp, no address. Only a single word in delicate script: listen. Inside was a map, not of roads or towns, but of sound. Drawn in charcoal on thick handmade paper, it traced frequencies like rivers, converging near Bethel, then branching outward across New England. At each junction, a name was written in tiny letters. Some Isolde recognized: Elspeth. Others were new: Yor, Emmett, Rhea. Names she had never heard, yet somehow knew belonged to children who had vanished without a trace, their stories buried beneath bureaucracy or silence. At the bottom of the map, a final note: the lullaby is spreading. They're waking, and they need more keepers. Her heart pounded. This wasn't just about Bethel anymore. The resonance Talia had spoken of, the thread of remembrance, was growing, and it was calling others. That night, Isolde placed the map on the kitchen table and lit 6 candles, one for each child now honored in the house. She closed her eyes and whispered not just their names, but the new ones from the map. As she spoke, Lyra, the back door creaked open. No wind blew. Yet the screen swayed gently, as if someone had just passed through. Isolde followed. Outside, beneath the old oak where Calliope had once scattered Talia's favorite wildflower seeds, stood a girl of about 12. She wore a raincoat 2 sizes too big, her dark hair tangled. her eyes wide with a mix of fear and hope. "I heard singing," the girl said, her voice barely above a whisper. "In my dreams. For weeks. A song I didn't know, but my heart did." Isolde knelt. "What's your name?" "Neve," she said. Pronounced Neve. "A rare name. Irish. Beautiful." And, Isolde would later learn, the name of a girl who had gone missing near Bar Harbor in 2059, last seen holding a stuffed rabbit and humming a tune her grandmother said sounded like it came from underground. Neve stepped forward. "The song led me here. It said, you'd know why I'm alone." Isolde didn't ask for proof. She simply opened her arms. That night, Neve slept in the spare room with the door open. And for the first time in years, she didn't dream of dark hallways or locked doors. She dreamed of 6 children dancing in a sunlit meadow, holding hands, laughing, and one of them turned to her, held out a hand, and said, "You're next." By morning, the nameless doll in the cedar chest had changed again. Its face now bore Neve's sharp cheekbones and thoughtful eyes. And tucked into its palm was a tiny rabbit made of moss and twine. Isolde understood. The house wasn't just remembering the past. It was preparing for the future. Over the next few months, others came, drawn not by news reports or internet rumors, but by dreams, by songs on the edge of hearing, by a sudden, unshakable certainty that they belonged somewhere they'd never been. A boy named Kai from Vermont, who had stopped speaking after his twin brother drowned in Lake Champlain, until he heard the lullaby in the rustle of cornfields and began to hum along. A young woman named Zinnia from rural New Hampshire, who found a doll on her doorstep the morning after her grandmother's funeral, its dress stitched from the same floral pattern as the shawl draped over the casket. Each arrival altered the house in subtle ways. The attic grew warmer. The garden bloomed out of season. The old music box on the mantel, silent for decades, began to play, not randomly, but in response to names spoken aloud. And always, at 3:17 a.m., the lullaby returned, now richer, layered with more voices, more stories, more love. Isolde taught them all the same ritual: speak the names daily, listen without fear, offer kindness to the unseen, and never ever forget that some souls don't need saving, they need witnessing. Then, on the evening of the summer solstice, Talia appeared. Not as a whisper, not as a memory, but standing on the porch at sunset, barefoot, wearing the same dress she'd worn the day she vanished. Only now it was whole, clean, glowing faintly in the golden light. Neve was the first to see her. She didn't scream. She simply said, "You came back." Talia smiled. "I never left. I've been walking the threads, finding the ones who still need to be found." She stepped inside. The house sighed, as if exhaling a breath it had held for decades. To Isolde, she said, "The circle is complete. But the work isn't done." "What comes next?" Isolde asked. Talia looked toward the map, now pinned to the wall and dotted with red pins marking every new arrival. "We teach them to carry the song. Not as burden, but as gift. And when the time comes, they'll pass it on." That autumn, the first class of keepers began. Not in a classroom, but around the kitchen table with steaming mugs and notebooks bound in cloth. Isolde, Talia, and the children, now young adults, taught them how to listen, how to honor, how to speak names with reverence. Kai learned to transcribe the lullaby into musical notation, each note tied to a specific child's story. Zinnia began weaving dolls from natural fibers, embedding them with herbs and whispered promises. Neve discovered she could sense which lost soul needed a name most, often before they even arrived. And the house? It thrived. Visitors came not to gawk, but to heal. Parents who had lost children left letters in the root cellar. Grandparents brought heirlooms to be blessed. Teachers brought students to learn that history isn't just in books. It's in the land, in the air, in the names we choose to carry. One winter night, as snow fell softly beyond the windows, Isolde asked Talia a question that had haunted her for years. Do they ever move on? The children, do they find peace? Talia gazed into the fire. Peace isn't a place, Isolde. It's a presence. As long as someone says their name, they're not lost. And as long as they're not lost, they're free. Years passed. Isolde's hair turned silver. Talia remained unchanged, though her eyes grew deeper, quieter, like wells that had seen centuries. Niev opened a small school in Bethel called the House of Remembered Names, where children learned local history, folklore, and the importance of listening to silence. And every year, on the anniversary of Talia's return, a new doll appeared on the shelf, crafted by unseen hands, bearing the face of a child whose story had finally been found. The lullaby never stopped. It simply grew. And on clear nights, if you stand at the edge of the Winslow property and listen closely, you'll hear it, not as a ghostly echo, but as a living song carried on the wind, sung by those who were forgotten and those who refused to forget. By the turn of the decade, the House of Remembered Names had grown beyond Bethel's quiet hills. What began as a kitchen table gathering of grieving souls and curious dreamers had blossomed into a quiet movement, one that spread not through social media or headlines, but through word of mouth, through lullabies hummed in distant towns, through dolls left on doorsteps with no note, only a name stitched into the hem of a tiny dress. Isolde, now in her late 60s, moved more slowly, but her voice carried further than ever. She no longer needed to speak every name each morning, because others did it for her. In Portland, a librarian lit a candle for Milo before opening the children's section. In Concord, a schoolteacher played Lynette's lullaby on a classroom piano each Friday. In a cabin near the Canadian border, an old man carved wooden figures for Cora and Jonah, placing them beneath a birch tree where fireflies gathered each June. The song had roots now, deep ones. And yet, on the eve of the spring equinox in 2083, something unexpected happened. The dolls stopped appearing. For the first time in over a decade, the cedar chest remained unchanged. No new face formed in the wood. No whispered name came in the hour before dawn. Even the lullaby grew quieter, as if listening for something new. Talia, who had remained a constant presence, began to withdraw. She spent entire days walking the perimeter of the property, her bare feet pressing into soil that seemed to sigh beneath her. When Niev asked what troubled her, Talia only said, "The thread is pulling in a different direction. Not backward, not forward, deeper." One rain-soaked afternoon, a knock came at the door, not hesitant, not curious, but firm, purposeful. Standing on the porch was a woman in a navy coat, her dark hair streaked with silver, eyes sharp with intelligence and something else, grief carefully contained. In her arms, she carried a child's backpack, worn at the seams, its zipper pulled tight. "My name is Dr. Eleanor Voss," she said, "and I believe you've been waiting for me." The name struck Isolde like a bell. Voss. Not a common surname. And in Bethel, it carried weight. "You're related to Elspeth," Isolde said, not as a question, but as a quiet certainty. Eleanor nodded. "Great niece. My grandfather was her older brother, the only one who stayed in Maine after the disappearances. He never spoke of her. Not once. But when he died last year, I found a box in his attic. Inside were letters, diaries, and a recording." She reached into her coat and pulled out a small digital player. He made it in 1989 on his deathbed. Said if anyone ever understood the lullaby, they'd know what to do with it. Isolde invited her in. They gathered in the parlor. Isolde, Talia, Niev, Kai, and Zinnia. Rain tapped gently against the windows as Eleanor pressed play. The voice that emerged was frail, trembling with age, but unmistakably male, and achingly familiar to those who had studied the archives. "My name is Silas Voss," it began, "and I failed my sister." He spoke of Elspeth not as a troubled child, but as a conduit, someone who heard what others couldn't. He described how, in the summer of 1953, a sinkhole had opened behind their barn, a fissure locals called the throat of the earth. Strange sounds came from it. Whispers, singing, children's laughter with no source. Elspeth, then 9, claimed the voices were lost, that they needed names to find their way home. But the adults called her delusional. Silas, just 16, tried to protect her, but when the other children began vanishing, suspicion turned to Elspeth. Not as a victim, but as a cause. "They thought she'd led them into the woods," Silas whispered on the recording. "But she didn't. She tried to bring them back. One night, she walked to the sinkhole with all her dolls. She said she'd trade herself for their return. I followed, but I was too afraid to go in." His voice broke. "I heard her sing. Then silence. When I looked, the hole was gone. Just flat earth. Like it had never been." He ended with a plea. "If anyone finds this, tell Elspeth I'm sorry. And tell the others, their names matter." Silence filled the room when the recording ended. Talia stood and walked to the window. "The sinkhole wasn't a grave," she said softly. "It was a doorway. And Elspeth didn't vanish. She crossed over, to hold the door open from the other side." Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. "All these years I thought our family was cursed. But it wasn't a curse. It was a calling." Isolde placed a hand on her arm. "And now you're here. Not to close the door, but to walk through it." That night, guided by Talia and the map that now pulsed with a faint inner light, they returned to the northern grove, the place where Cassandra had been buried, where the 6 dots marked the convergence of stories. Beneath the oldest pine, the earth was soft. Together they dug, not deep but wide. And as their hands brushed the soil, the ground trembled, not violently, but like a heartbeat. From below came a sound. Not a whisper. A chorus. From joyful. The lullaby, whole, complete, sung by every child who had ever waited in the dark. And then, rising from the earth like mist-given voice, 6 figures emerged, not ghosts, not memories, but forms woven from light and longing. Elspeth stepped forward, her hand outstretched. She didn't look at Talia. She looked at Eleanor. "You're the last," she said. "The one who carries our blood and our silence." Eleanor sank to her knees. "I'm here," she whispered. "I remember you." As she spoke Elspeth's name aloud, not as legend, but as kin, the air shimmered. The other children smiled. And one by one, they turned toward the woods, walking not into shadow, but into a golden light that had no source yet filled the entire clearing. Only Elspeth remained. She touched Eleanor's cheek. "Tell our story," she said. "Not as tragedy, as truth." Then she faded, not into nothing, but into the wind, into the rustle of pine needles, into the quiet hum of the land itself. Back at the house, the dolls on the shelf were unchanged, but their eyes no longer watched. They rested, at peace. The next morning, the cedar chest was empty. All 6 dolls were gone. In their place lay a single seed, smooth, dark, and warm to the touch. Isolde planted it beneath the oak tree. Within a week, a sapling sprouted, its leaves shaped like tiny hands, its bark etched with faint lines that, in certain light, looked like names. Years later, when tourists asked about the tree, Niev would simply say, "It's a memory tree. If you stand beneath it and speak a name with love, the leaves will sing it back." Isolde passed away peacefully in her sleep on a night thick with stars. She was buried not in the town cemetery, but beneath the memory tree, with a doll made by Zinnia placed in her hands. The lullaby played softly through the house for 3 nights after, then grew quiet, not from absence, but from completion. Talia was not seen again. But on still nights, when the moon hangs low over Bethel, children sometimes leave dolls at the base of the tree. And by morning, the dolls are gone, replaced by wildflowers or smooth stones or notes that read, "Thank you for remembering me." The House of Remembered Names still stands. It teaches not only history, but presence. Not only loss, but love that outlives time. And the lullaby? It's no longer just a song. It's a promise, passed from heart to heart, name to name, soul to soul.